So, someone mentioned earlier it's been 6 months since legalization to the day, which is exciting, but we've seen a lot and heard a lot about edibles and the next wave of legalization. We've heard, deals like Constellation Brands and Molson Coors. We haven't really seen a lot of pharmaceutical companies enter into this space yet. There's obviously Tilray and Sandoz, but there's really not a lot of big pharma yet entered into this space. So Smoke, I want to start with you. When do you think we're going to see more interest from those big pharma players and more at least demonstrated interest? I'm sure there's a lot going on behind the scenes, but when do you think we're going to start to hear about bigger deals coming into play?
Well, for sure, there's a lot behind the scenes, and one of the things that we certainly know is big pharma is the biggest roadblock to legalization in the U.S. So state by state and at the federal level, we're running into big pharma behind in the halls of power. It doesn't get a lot of press, but it's happening in every single state house. So New Jersey just delayed their vote for legalization, and there's 14 of the top 25 pharma companies in the world are based in New Jersey. Guess how that happened? So it's not because the people of Jersey don't want it. So right now, Big Pharma is still fighting, but I think behind the scenes, from everything I understand, they're certainly working on, projects, but they've been pretty much the largest obstacle to the legalization that I know about.
And I don't know if either of you, Dr. Allen or David, if you've experienced some of those challenges as well, because as you're building your products, obviously there is probably going to be some pushback from more traditional pharma companies that don't want that necessarily in this space.
I'm not so sure. Not so sure about that. I've developed heart failure therapies for my entire career, and if you're going to develop a new medicine, you have to demonstrate its utility and its capability through carefully controlled clinical research. So I believe ideally what Big Pharma is ultimately doing is just stepping back, watching the development efforts going on, and when they see the right therapeutic strategy evolving, they're going to enter with force, as they typically do. But that'll be more at a targeted medicine. So the area of cardiology where we primarily operate is a very conservative practice of medicine. Cardiologists deal with folks with heart failure, which is one of the leading causes of death and disability in the Western world. They're going to want to see these therapies developed very thoughtfully, very carefully through properly controlled clinical research. And that's why we're developing it from a pharmaceutical perspective.
Nowadays, I think if you look at the drugs that were approved, for example, last year, a lot of them are actually the drugs that are approved and owned by big pharmaceutical companies. A lot of them were licensed in, right, or acquired, like there was an acquisition of a smaller company. So certainly I know big pharmaceutical companies are watching what we're doing at our company. So I think you're right. They're waiting, they're watching, they're waiting to see that there is data. And they'll jump in when they need to. They've got the money to do it, so they will.
And talking more about these different formats and getting the proper research going and sort of testing these methods, Dr. Allen, obviously you work specifically in this area and are building different delivery methods. Do you feel like as we start to see more formats roll out, especially within Canada, which has been very limited so far, but obviously there's the hope in October that we'll have concentrates and edibles and topicals. As these different delivery methods, come to the market, do you feel like that's going to increase adoption? And what do you think people are going to be most interested in?
I think if people are really interested in adoption, they need to think about education and data. And even, I think they really go hand in hand because I usually educate with data. So when we talk about all of these new dosage forms, we've got to be mindful that whether you take a tablet orally or you use a sublingual spray, you're going to get a completely different distribution of the cannabinoid. And so the efficacy, the toxicity will be different. And so we need to better understand the relationships between the dosage form, the dose, the dosing schedule, and how that then results in different bioavailability and efficacy. And I don't think that we're doing that right now. So, somebody that goes out there and uses a CBD oil for anxiety. If it doesn't work, they stop using it, right? And it may not have worked because there may have been an issue with quality control of the product. It may not have worked because the dose or the dosing schedule wasn't right, but we won't know that. So I think for sustained use, for widespread adoption, we need data. So companies, it's not just about producing new exciting dosage forms or formulations. It's also about getting the data. And that, I think there's a missing piece there. People need to go get the data, and then they need to educate consumers that are self-medicating, educate health professionals, educate patients. So that's the piece I think we're missing now in this industry, is the data and the education.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like both of you agree with that. I could see some nodding of heads there. David, I mean, what do you think is the research people should be paying attention to? Obviously, you're working specifically within, heart failure, but from anybody on the panel, really, is there research out there that you're seeing that people should be paying attention to, that everybody should be looking at and reading and understanding?
I think certainly some of the most interesting, if we're talking about CBD, for example, its application to central nervous system disorders like epilepsy. There's some interesting work being done in anxiety in very agoraphobic type patients which have profound anxiety. But I think the enabler of this research is going to be access to a pure form of this medicine to actually develop. So at Cardiol, we started out developing a heart failure medicine. In early discussions with regulators like Health Canada, FDA, it became clear to us that we needed to have a pure molecule to test. So when we demonstrate the clinical utility of this molecule, we can ascribe a benefit to exactly what we're testing. So we have now developed the ability to scale, on a mass scale, the production of pure pharmaceutical CBD at 100% purity. We see an opportunity to commercialize this product in this growing market where we believe consumers they're actually turning away from issues they have with current medicine. So if you think about anxiety, there isn't an over-the-counter anxiety medicine. It's typically treated with narcotics, and which can be addictive, which can have a tranquilizing effect. So what's driving adoption of CBD in general is anxiety or deficiencies in currently available pain medications and anti-anxiolytics. We, of course, have somewhat of a bias because we see this molecule as cardioprotective. And we see an opportunity to build GW Pharma type platforms, not necessarily targeting epilepsy, which they built a $7 billion franchise around. We see rare forms of cardiac disease like acute myocarditis and chemotherapy-induced cardiomyopathy or chemotherapy-induced heart failure. But in order to enable that research, you need a pure molecule to test. And that's why we have developed what we believe to be the largest platform in the world today to make this pure medicine to enable that testing.
Amazing.
I think it's interesting, the different approaches, and I think there's going to be pure pharma research, clinical kind of trials, and there's also a wide range of solutions to lots of ailments, which don't include pure molecules. We know that there's over 150 cannabinoids in the plant, and we've very scratched the surface on the benefits of these, and we know that there's interaction among them. So, we're of the more holistic approach of, look, we know this plant has anti-inflammatory, it helps with pain. I'm an old wrestler, I used to take Advil every day. I now do not take Advil. It's, I can't prove it. I can prove it from myself though, and so can lots of people that use these products, right? So we're developing brands, and I kind of look at it, look, there's a lot of benefits from the products that are GNC, but they didn't go through the clinical trial and they're not bottled up in big pharma. They're supplements that help people. And so there's a wide range of where this can go, and I think it's going to be both. I think there's going to be medicines that get developed. We keep our eyes on that, and looking for opportunities to license and partner with folks that are doing research. At the same time, consumers are looking to they want information, and one of the ways they can get information is having respected people that are using these products and that can speak to it. So from our standpoint, we're more of a brand company, and we're launching brands all over the US in CBD and in the cannabis world in the markets we're in. And we're working with athletes and other people that have following that can speak to the effect that it's having for them. So that's one way to get. One of the biggest problems is there's so much bad product out there that we don't know where it came from. We don't know what's in it. A lot of them you get online, they don't have actually CBD in them, or they're not tested. So we're very much in favor of the FDA process that's happening, and having a clear regulatory framework for putting CBD and other cannabinoids into edibles and beverages and all the other things that we want to do. We want the process to happen. We just don't want it to be bottled up forever in the bureaucracy and big pharma. So we're trying to play a constructive role in that.
I think it's a really exciting time because there's a lot of great preclinical research going on. I always go on clinicaltrials.gov to really see what's going on in terms of clinical studies. There's 184 clinical trials that are going on cannabidiol right now at leading academic institutions, medical research institutions, and some companies, which is that are supporting some of them, which is really exciting. I mean, and there's everything. There's tablets, there's oral, liquids, there's sublingual, there's chewing gum. I mean, you name it. There's so many dosage forms there. I think there's going to be a lot of really exciting data coming out. For me, as I'm also an academic, I'm a professor at U of T, so I like data. As our CEO will tell you, he's sitting here. I'm a big data fan, so the bar is pretty high for us. And we've got a dermocosmetic line as well at Avicanna, and even on those products, we're running clinical trials. So I do want to see data. I want to be able to share that data with consumers so consumers can make informed decisions, and it's not just about, not just a money grab.
100%. And that actually brings up the next point I wanted to chat with, and we'll start with you on this one, Smoke. You were talking about using celebrities with your products in the US, which isn't necessarily something that can be done here in Canada. But we've also talked about how does this roll out as more of a traditional pharma product. When we look at how typically drugs are adopted through medical professionals, a lot of that is based on their education and understanding of the drug, its application and treatment for their patients. We've seen a real resistance in Canada, especially around doctors. There are some doctors that are really embracing cannabis, and when you look at CMA, the Canadian Medical Association, they are saying, no, we're not there yet. They're not ready to embrace it yet. So how do you get medical professionals to embrace this? Even when we talk about more nutraceuticals and those types of consumer-based products, a lot of times they will use sort of endorsements through the medical profession to help give credibility to the consumer so that they feel like there's some safety behind the product. So how do we engage doctors in that? And how do we educate them so that they can then embrace these types of products and help their patients with treatment? Well,
the biggest problem and the cause of the resistance is the medical schools didn't even teach that there was a endocannabinoid system in medical school. Mm-hmm. So these doctors a lot of them don't believe it, or maybe they're starting to now, but they weren't trained in it. Mm-hmm. So it starts with education, and we know this is real, we know this exists, and propagating that information is a starting point. They're also getting requests. The reason CVS and Walgreens announced that they were putting CBD products into their stores is not because they just thought it was a good idea, it's because their customers are asking for it. Mm-hmm. So all these doctors out there are getting asked these questions by their customers. And I think I've seen doctors who are more holistic in nature, embrace this, and they look at all types of medicine, Asian medicine and the like. And I think you're seeing those guys way out in front. But I think traditional medicine, they're getting so many requests that it's of interest, and it's in their interest to learn about it. Mm-hmm. So I think education, it starts with that, just the basics of yes, you have a system that, the number one place that the cannabinoid is found inside the human body is in breast milk. Mm-hmm. Is that true?
Number one, what did you say?
Yeah, the cannabinoid is in breast milk.
Endocannabinoids.
Yeah,
endocannabinoids.
Right, but your body's producing this, mm-hmm. and doctors didn't know about it in the in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So it's pretty interesting to me that they went all this time without even knowing about this system, mm-hmm. and so it's not surprising that there's resistance. Mm-hmm.
But I would just add to that I think one of the barriers is data. Yeah. So physicians, pharmacists, all the learned individuals that are the intermediaries between the patient and the consumer and the medicine they choose, they want to understand how the medicine works, but they also want to understand exactly what the medicine is. Mm-hmm. And challenge for pharmacists and physicians is understanding exactly what they're prescribing. Mm-hmm. So that's when we started down the heart medicine path. We chose to start with a pure pharmaceutical molecule. We're fascinated by the opportunity to introduce this, though, as a medicinal product into this growing market of medicinal cannabinoids. But with our medicine, it will have a high level of purity. It'll be at 100% pure each and every time. So we know, because we make it under CGMP, because our manufacturers are FDA certified, because we have a drug master file with the Food and Drug Administration, we know that each and every drop of our medicine is chemically identical to each and every drop of every other bottle of medicine that we produce. So to the extent that therapeutic benefits are ascribed to the medicine that you take from Cardiol, you'll know you can derive the same benefit each and every time because the medicine is chemically identical and pure.
Yeah, I don't see quite the same pushback, I don't think, and I think we have to think beyond doctors. It's also nurses, pharmacists, and all healthcare practitioners. I know the Ontario Pharmacists Association just rolled out a new CE module on medical cannabis a couple weeks ago. We've integrated that into our curriculum at the Faculty of Pharmacy at U of T. I know Waterloo has done the same in their faculty, and we're only going to be increasing that content as time goes by because patients want it, right? But it does come back to data because in terms of what the as a responsible healthcare professional, you need data. Right, you need efficacy and most importantly, you need safety data, right? So until we have that data, and I think it's imminent, we're going to have that data because there are all these clinical studies that are running, but it cannot be anecdotal. So if you go on the OMA's website, you'll see they talk about, where there's a good volume of high quality research. So for example, for medical cannabis, that's in spasticity, nausea, vomiting, chronic pain, not acute pain. So I think we need to get data around some of these other, in some of these other therapeutic areas. Otherwise, I just don't think they can responsibly prescribe.
Agreed. And you were talking earlier about the different methods, and you're talking about gum and gummies and all of these things. We are definitely seeing a lot of seniors that are really interested in CBD and the other cannabis effects that could potentially reduce some of the other medications they're on. But there's a real challenge in terms of they don't want to smoke or maybe they don't want to vape. So when you're thinking about, especially for you, Dr. Allen, when you're thinking about what is the next big thing that's going to come down the pipe, because we do already have a Health Canada approved sublingual spray, and we have an intimate oil from Hexo. So, what do you think is the next big trend when it comes to these formats? What are we likely going to see coming from the next rollout of concentrates and things like that?
I think, we're certainly working on a lot of oral and sublingual formulations. Dermatology is a big area for us, so topical transdermal formulations. But I think personally, I'm not a big fan of the edibles just because of this delayed onset and concern that there are other people start to stack or whatever you say to just continue to take because they don't see an effect. The way that we're developing things, in particular for cannabidiols, we treat it as an API, so we're kind of going down this same road where it's treated as more of a pharmaceutical active ingredient, and then we have other products that are more resin-based. In terms of what I think, I just think it's going to be where the data is because, again, a lot of these seniors are going to rely on their healthcare professionals. They're going to rely on the guidance, and there's also the potential for drug-drug interactions, and many of them are on many other drugs, right? So I hope they are relying on their healthcare professional.
In California, we've got every form factor known to everything from edibles and beverages to tinctures and the concentrates, and so we're seeing a huge shift away from the smokable side of things. It's not shrinking; it's just everything else is growing like crazy. So now it's about 50-50. In 5 years, it'll be 15% flower and 85% every other form. So we're also doing a lot of topicals and lotions and various things. And the big challenge with the edibles and beverage market is being solved for, and that's onset and consistency. So if you can do low dose, quick acting beverages and have an alternative to other types of beverages, and it acts quickly. So I could have 3 or 4 of these in an evening, and while you're having your wine and you're having your scotch, and I'd be at the same pace of the night. That's a game changer. That's a multi-billion-dollar category, and that's happening.
But one of the great challenges when we think about CBD, unlike THC, CBD is heavily metabolized by the liver, but it's also deactivated by the liver. So, and it also has a short half-life because it's lipophilic, or it's fat soluble. Our blood is an aqueous water-like medium. So we're working on hydrophilic versions or water-like versions of this. Transdermal is an interesting way to bypass liver metabolism because it enters the circulation directly. We've developed nanoformulations to target this medicine at the heart. We see opportunities to target it at the brain. And ultimately, we see the opportunity to develop sublingual nanoemulsions to permeate transmucosal directly into the systemic circulation, all in an effort to increase both the bioavailability of this drug. So once it enters the body, it's not cleared because it's not seen as fat soluble, but more importantly, to target it at sites of disease, in our case, specifically at inflamed tissue in the heart.
You've talked a lot about the importance of the molecule when it comes to the CBD and the work that your team has been doing. How important is that purity for a consumer? And really, obviously it's not necessarily applicable to what you guys are working on right now because it's very pharma-based, but especially when you're looking at those consumer products, what should consumers be considering if they're gonna start using CBD, and how important is that purity? And I think Smoke, you mentioned it before, like the importance of having a tested, thoroughly quality certified product.
Well, impurity in medicine is something that's rather strange to us. So I would expect any medicine that I would take to be pure, meaning 100% pure. We see the term pharmaceutical as meaning pure. We don't use the term pharmaceutical grade because we make it pharmaceutically. So look at the history of aspirin. It comes from the bark of a willow tree. It's now made pharmaceutically to make it accessible and affordable for the global market. We see the same with CBD. So if you want a medicine to be truly trusted, make it pure, not 90%, 80%, 85%, make it 100% pure. When I walk into a pharmacy, I would expect the medicines that I would buy there would be pure.
I think for me, it's if you're using a CBD resin-based product or CBD isolate-based product, the most important thing is that it's well characterized. So what is the concentration of that active ingredient? So in this case, if it's cannabidiol, if it's CBD, you need to know the concentration. And there have been studies that have shown, and the FDA has sent out a number of warning letters to companies, where the CBD concentration hasn't been what it says on the package label. So this is a big issue for us. Again, it's a quality control. If somebody takes this, they don't see an effect, why? They're gonna stop using it, right? So we need to, I can't for the life of me understand why companies wouldn't at least be thinking about quality control of their products. It's kind of like the lowest hanging fruit to me.
I think it's happening. So it's a natural evolution. We're moving from the wild, wild west of everything's illegal to now partial legalization to now large amounts of capital coming in with professional management teams, building brands, studying science, bringing stuff to the table. So there's a lot of little companies out there throwing stuff in the back room into jars and selling it on the internet today, but those people aren't gonna make it. That's not gonna happen. If anyone's out there, it's not gonna work anymore. I've got 2,500 acres of farmland dedicated to hemp this crop. We're gonna produce hundreds of millions of this stuff at scale, at pharma grade. We use pharma grade, but I don't use half the other terms you use, so, but it's okay. But we're doing it at scale and properly. So, and there's lots of companies that are coming in now doing that, bringing capital and management to the table. It's a game changer, right?
Yeah, it will be.
Yeah.
And I think what legislation has done is it's broken down the barriers to conduct research. So many years ago, if I wanted to ship pure pharmaceutical CBD to the Houston DeBakey Heart Center, where we're conducting research, which is a world-leading center for heart failure research, I would spend a year just getting the necessary permits to do that. So with this changing of the legislation and the descheduling of this important area of medicine, research can be spawned around the world to better understand it, so it can be targeted, it can be better understood, and it can be made available.
Well, that is all the time we have. We have maybe time for one question if there are, and I see there is a question right here. So I don't know, I think I have the mic, so.
This is me. This is a question for Dr. Allen. Have you seen any data to suggest that different dosage forms are better for reacting with different CD receptors, like say a topical is better for
Right.
CP2,
Yeah.
oral is better for CP1?
So it's interesting that you say that because there's a number of companies that have contacted me asking if we have dosage forms to target specific receptors. It's something that we're interested in. I haven't seen anything out there yet personally, but it's certainly something that we're interested in. We're also working on nanotechnology, so that's something that we're interested in.
Synthetics versus plants. How close are we really going to get to synthetics being better than, or, I mean, just talk to synthetics versus a plant for me, because I don't really understand why we do plants if we do synthetics.
So I'll repeat the question since you guys might have the answer. She asked what the comparison is and where it's going with synthetics versus plant-based production. So I don't know if one of you guys has an answer.
I mean, since synthesis is going on in the plant, it's just enzyme-based as opposed to other stimulus. So chemical synthesis or organic chemistry to make pharmaceuticals is inevitably the way any medicine will ultimately go if it wants to be made on mass scale at high levels of purity and reproducibly, ultimately to make it accessible. And I continue to go back to the aspirin example.
Dr. Allen, is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I mean,
Okay.
I have our CEO here, so. So I mean, one direction to go in is obviously, let's say a CBD or THC isolate product. The other direction, though, is a resin-based product, right? So it depends on what you're interested in. And there are so many other great cannabinoids that we haven't even started to work on yet, right? So I do see real value in extraction of all of these different compounds and pursuing them and understanding their therapeutic potential. So that's something that I'm very interested in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone, for your time and for the audience questions. Have a great day.
Okay.
Thanks.